Good evening. Tonight, my guest, Lorelai Dumitrescu, you already met her. And at my left, there is another member of our Friday Night Youth Discussion Club. His name is Philip Dumitrescu. Philip, what is your special passion, or should I say, realm of expertise in life and in as interest in study and reading and talking, of course?
I inherited a passion, especially from my father regarding history. So ever since I was a little kid, I was very interested in history. And I studied it in college, and I keep studying it as much as I can.
What history did you study in college?
I focus mainly on Roman and American history.
Roman and American history. Are they not like parallel? Like it's America, the history of Rome repeating itself, they say?
Some people think that because they're both republics in their foundings, that they have a lot of parallels. But I kind of try to separate the two in separate camps.
Separate camps.
They have a lot of similarities, but they do have a lot of differences.
There are a lot of prophecies of doom based on the destiny of the Roman Republic.
Correct.
And they say the American Republic might repeat the history of the fall of the Roman Empire.
I wouldn't doubt it.
You wouldn't doubt it?
No.
Okay, good. Let's go to our topic tonight. And our topic tonight is equality. And basically, we are going to cover two hot issues related to the topic of equality. Racial equality, and a very hot topic, something that is being talked about a lot, sexual orientation equality. And so let's start with race. Do you think that there is a real issue in this aspect of race equality? Do you believe, because some people say, no, race equality is just a fiction, is just a bluff of the left, and other people say that the race inequality is the main disease of our society. What is your opinion about racial inequality or equality? And especially, I'm going to ask you about the situation of race in the United States of America.
Okay, I'll begin just giving a general statement. There definitely have been advances made in this area. We definitely have made huge strides in the last maybe 40 years, especially in terms of civil rights. But to say that there isn't a large underlying racism that exists in the United States, particularly against African American people, is really an inaccurate view of society today.
But is it not true that there is a real equal opportunity in the United States? And some races are disadvantaged because they are less hardworking or less highly achieving?
I think if you take a general glance at the situation, you would say that there is equal opportunity. But if you look a little bit deeper and you see that the playing field is definitely not leveled in terms of the opportunities that are open to people that live in certain geographic locations, the way that certain opportunities are limited for certain inner city communities. I think a more in-depth study will show you that we haven't made that many strides in those areas.
You know, sometimes I'm listening to talk radio. I hear a lot about black people being privileged by affirmative action. They take the jobs from white people. They take places in colleges. What would you say about this?
Well, considering that that for a very long period of time with the Jim Crow laws of the Deep South, that black people were not even allowed to get an education. So that's why in certain areas of the Eastern Seaboard, especially in Virginia, Maryland, and other states, that there were black universities being founded by educated black people, that they weren't even allowed to go to a University of Virginia or a University of North Carolina, that they had to start their own colleges to make their own institutions of higher learning, that didn't help the situation. But with affirmative action, I believe that some people have a negative connotation because they are getting financial and government help in their higher education, where they try to set aside certain blocks of percentage for African American youth to be able to get a higher education?
I'm not challenging the concept of affirmative action here, but the way it is implemented, do you think that it really works? It's really rewarding, hardworking, and it's motivating young black students to learn harder?
Well, if you're stupid and you don't know how to read and write, and you don't do a good, you don't have a good test in ACT or ACT, you will not be able to go and get into an affirmative action program if you're an African American youth.
I think the point of affirmative action in its inception was that it would be a way to level the playing field by instituting certain programs to help open doors for hardworking African American students who, because, I mean, if you look at the way schools are funded, it's based on property tax, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
And so historically, the way African Americans have been segregated, especially in urban centers like Chicago, you see that they ended up in certain neighborhoods that are socioeconomically lower, and that tax money goes to the local schools. And if you have less tax money going to the schools, you have inferior programs you probably don't have if you compare maybe an inner city school to New Trier, which is one of the top schools in the nation in Evanston or somewhere up north. They don't have half of the programs that are available to the New Trier students. And obviously the New Trier students are going to have just, the resumes are going to be filled with all kinds of exceptional activities, and they look like more attractive candidates. It's really not fair to compare that student with an inner city student who has very good grades but didn't have the possibility to take certain advanced classes, like maybe engineering wasn't offered at that school. So it actually is, I personally believe that in this respect, that student isn't working less hard than the student at the good high school. It's just they don't have the options that the other student in the suburban areas have. And also, if you look historically what happened with the suburbs, many African Americans were denied loans to move into the suburbs based on race. Or if they were able to afford housing, they were pushed out, or there was violent acts committed against them. So you see this transition trying to go to the suburbs, being kept out. So this is not these groups' fault. So in that case, affirmative action is a very positive thing.
It's necessary.
It's necessary to wrong the historical ills that have been done.
To counterpoint it, I can understand that some conservative people do think that the government shouldn't be able to help certain groups achieve certain ends. I do agree in principle to it, but I think that if you try to help some disadvantaged people in a certain situation, like affirmative action, that it does generate some help, because then if you have a family that gets out of poverty through a college education and gets a good job, that would help them bring other people out of poverty. It would be a good example for their community and all that stuff.
How long have been affirmative action being applied in the United States?
I think in 1961, I think John F. Kennedy was the first to institute the first kind of draft of affirmative action.
So we have already half a century of affirmative action. Did it work?
There's been statistics that shown that it's worked.
So you have a black middle class, educated.
Oh, we definitely have
that
in the United States.
There's I would say as a percentage, it's not as large as the white middle class. But they only constitute 12% of the population.
But they say that the ghetto population is also multiplying, and there are a lot of black young people with no prospect for the future, like in education or jobs or competing on the job market. So they say this class is basically increasing in the United States, and it's feeding crime and violence and the prisons. So is this not evidence that didn't work?
I believe that the poverty class in the United States, not based on race, is increasing. That's especially since the Great Recession from 2008 until today has begun. There has been a jump of 5 or 6 million people from like the mid-30s, 30 million, 35 million to about 40, 45 million.
What is the reason for it?
Because the recession took away a lot of jobs from people, and a lot of people fall into poverty due to that, especially if you have some people that are dependent on one person in the household that has a job instead of being dependent on 2, or vice versa. And that has had a more of a larger impact, I believe, on the African American community, where their unemployment numbers are 5 or 6 percentage points higher than
the rest of the population.
Than the rest of the population. So with white Americans, it's 9, 10%. With African Americans, it's probably 15, 20%, depending on, you know, the areas that they live in.
I would like to add to that. There's another level that keeps certain African Americans from advancing, and you said there's a proliferation of negative aspects. I think a lot of that has to do with expectations in education that are placed on African American students, and I observe a lot of high schools now, and we've learned a lot of like history of education, and a lot of times, until fairly recently, teachers had this concept of cultural deficit, meaning that there's something intrinsically lower in certain immigrant communities, and that's why you see that during the 60s and 70s, after special education started in the United States, you have a disproportionate amount of African American males in special education who just had maybe difficulty with math. They were automatically put in special education. At the same time, you have teachers who have low expectations, and we know that students will only rise to the expectations that are put on them. And this has been a systematic attitude that many teachers have had, and now there's changes being made for this. So there's a mixture of all kinds of things, and so until we change education too, and we stop this low expectations, we can't see too many changes.
Okay.
Also, I'd like to add, due to the epidemics of crack and cocaine in the 1980s and early 90s, due to the heroin epidemic of the late 70s in ghetto America, that these things did not help even, let's say, a poor family trying to raise themselves up by pulling themselves up out of a situation. These epidemics of drugs did not help a situation. And I believe, it's just a personal opinion, I believe that a lot of the organized crime element of America was trying to focus on African Americans for a secure market,
because they didn't
want to sell to their own people.
Yeah.
So if a mafia gang of some sort would prefer to sell drugs to an African American community versus to a white American community, they saw that as less negative for themselves to do that.
Is it possible that street dealers, you know, the base of the food chain in drug dealing, the street dealers basically picked from the African American community because they have poverty issues, and selling cocaine or marijuana or drugs is a way to make a sort of decent living. I wouldn't use the word decent here, you know?
Not decent, but a fast living to, you know, you can be 20-something years old and be driving a Cadillac a few
Of course. You have no other chance.
Yes.
Except
you feel like you don't have another chance. You feel like, this is very interesting. I have a friend who works in Chicago public schools. She said that many of her students have never even, she lives on the fringe of the Chicago border, have never been downtown. These students have not been outside of their neighborhoods to see that something else is possible. So they're stuck in these areas and they don't know what else is around, and this is their opportunity to make some money. And I think if this opportunity arose in any other country, in any other situation, the same thing would happen. It doesn't have to do with them being black. It's a socioeconomic issue, and it's an easy way to make money.
But is it also possible that becomes part of the culture? Like I heard this phrase in the United States, acting white, you know, among high school students. Like if you speak good English, if you do good in school, then you're acting white.
That is definitely, unfortunately, an attitude that many people in the ghetto, I don't even want to use that word, but that's an attitude that people have because of their own personal insecurity. When they see somebody advancing, that's a way to kind of keep some type of solidarity with their group. And so they want to be that person, but they don't feel like they can, so they put down that person who's advancing and calling it being white. That definitely happens, and that is a problem.
I'm going to ask you a hard question, a difficult one, uncomfortable question. I mean, the United States of America is definitely the most Christian nation in the Western world. It's more Christianized than Europe or Canada or Australia. Is the church part of the problem, or is the church a way to solve the racial problem in the States, or both? So first of all, Philip, in the history of the United States, was the church part of the racial problem? Like it enhanced racial sentiments?
I think it did. Following the Civil War, the American Civil War, and the abolition of slavery, pretty much African Americans founded their own churches, predominantly Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian churches in the South. And they kind of worshiped in their own way. Now, it didn't help that the Ku Klux Klan and some of these organizations did have a very big Christian element to it. I mean, that's
pastors, elders.
That's why they had a burning cross, for instance, if they wanted
yeah.
to terrorize somebody. I mean, of all the things that they want to burn and to scare people, they would burn a cross instead of burning something else.
A star, for instance.
A star, or yeah. Or,
secular hammer or something.
Or, yeah. But of all the things that they would symbolize as a fear-making tool,
was the cross.
Was a cross, which I would think would be a very bad symbol to use.
It was a kind of crusading. I talked to people in the South, Christian people in the South. They told me that the KKK was basically an organization aimed at protecting the Christian values and Christian culture against communist infiltration. How about this? Was there any communist infiltration in the civil rights movement?
Well, if you look at like the Pan-African movement and Kwame Nkrumah and these people that were, they had socialist tendencies, and even people like Malcolm X who supported communism and met with Fidel Castro and all these people.
And the King.
I don't know about Martin Luther King and his
so.
ties, but I definitely see that there's this attitudes that associate these two groups. But I didn't understand the second part of your question.
I think when you have a white ruling class in the Deep South, and they have most of the money, most of the power, and you have a smaller African American class, a poor African American class. Obviously, if they're intellectual leaders, or they're people that are trying to make changes in their society, Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, they're obviously going to try to associate themselves with somebody who believes that there should be an equality between all forms of people.
This is communism.
And that would be, a take of communism or socialism, any way you like it. But if you're going to have to take certain rights and privileges from an aristocratic people, that is, in a certain way, communism. So obviously, people that are going to be affiliated with the KKK or some of these white racist groups obviously are going to see that as a negative thing.
Philip,
that sometimes the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So sometimes if a socialist or a communist is my friend and is my ally, they might associate together to fight on a common front against each other.
I want to ask a question. There was that Red Scare, in the 50s, I think,
And in the 20s.
In the 20s, and it was associated a lot in the 60s, was associated with Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement. And they said, like Edgar Hoover, a movie is coming with Edgar Hoover, by the way. Edgar Hoover claimed that there is a positive evidence on Soviet Union infiltration into the civil rights movement and the Hollywood elites. Was this a fact or just a paranoia?
I know that J. Edgar Hoover did have a very thick file on Martin Luther King. Some of those things are still not brought to light. I don't know if they're classified, but they're probably locked somewhere to not, become common knowledge. I know that he would bring it to the attention of JFK and his brother Robert Kennedy and other political officials, Lyndon Johnson, and during his tenure as head of the FBI, that he had a lot of dirt on Martin Luther King and his association with a lot of leftist groups that compromised, like the Black Panthers and some other anti-establishment groups of the 1960s. But just because he made contact with them and maybe he would meet up with them doesn't necessarily mean that they were, you know, in cahoots trying to overthrow the U.S. system at that time. I personally, in my belief, and I give him the benefit of the doubt, I think that Martin Luther King did work within the system. He was more influenced by Gandhi's teachings and by other people's teachings of non-violence than trying to make a revolution and take over or give so much freedom. That's why, you know, his speech in the Mall of Washington was so famous because he did not use the tactics of some of the revolutionary thinkers of that age.
Back to the religious racial issue. They say that the American church is the most segregated place in the United States of America. Would you agree with this statement?
I very much agree with that statement.
I'm going to ask you a sensitive question. What do you think about black and white conferences across denominations?
My opinion, I see the purpose of it. I think that that if you gather together a bunch of conferences or churches because of some form of ethnic upbringing, I think it does help financially, that they help each other a lot more than would be helped out otherwise. But on the other hand, if we're supposed to be all brothers in the same faith, I don't really see the logic to it.
And it does perpetuate negative stereotypes. It definitely does. And I had the opportunity to work with a group of missionaries where many of them was the first time working with African American missionaries. And there were a lot of cultural clashes and certain assumptions that were made because there wasn't a lot of interaction beforehand. And I think keeping these things so segregated, I don't think anybody is against.
Can you give me an example of stereotypes?
Oh, there are so many that there are. I had one particular, two friends. One was African American and one was from Pennsylvania. And they were having a discussion. And my African American friend is in medical school. She's a very intelligent woman, just on every subject. She's just really smart. And so is my American friend. And my African American friend talked about history, and she gave some date about something important that happened. And my white friend said, "Oh, wow, you know that?" in a very surprised manner, which my African-American friend later revealed to me that is something that she deals with on a daily basis. Like, "Oh, wow, you're different. Wow, you know these things. Wow, you're not like everybody else." And these may be subtle, and most people probably won't pick up on these subtle statements, but they are things that keep racism alive. And a lot of African-Americans will tell you that when they walk into a room, they feel like there's certain assumptions already made about them and that they have to fight these assumptions and prove that they're not whatever this assumption is. So I think going back to the conferences, yes, maybe there's some cultural things that it's good to have together and celebrate together, but on a larger scale, ultimately we're perpetuating just not creating a dialogue with different cultures. And also, I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but sometimes there's a tendency, especially in the European churches, to kind of look down on the cultures, African-American cultures and communities, and say, oh, their style of music or their style of worship or is somehow inferior. And I think that is not
It's not only like culturally inferior. I think there is an assumption that jazz and African-American music is from the devil. Because
right, that's part of
they had that history of animism back in Africa, so they brought it over here and they intoxicated the culture. They poisoned the culture with their jazz. And
I don't think that this would be such a big problem if once in a while some people would go visit different churches. I remember as a kid, my father had a very good friend, John, and he was an African American. He was a business partner of his, and we visited their church. He was a Seventh-day Adventist as well, and we visited their church on the south side of Chicago. And I've gone to an African-American church, and they have different forms, you know, of the same worship. I mean, it's a little bit different. They do a lot more singing and praising. But on the other hand, I personally don't find anything wrong with it, but I felt what they kind of feel because we were pretty much the only white people in the church, but we felt very welcome. And I would not say that I felt, you know, I felt like there was a lot of eyes looking at us, but I didn't feel discriminated against.
But
or
what if a black couple came to the Romanian church, let's say?
That's usually
I would hope for our benefit that people would be happy and embrace them and go and shake their hand and say hello, brother or sister. I would think that would be the great thing to do. I hope that people in their mind would not be judging or not be saying like, what are these people doing here or something like that. That would be a scary thought happening in a house of worship, in my opinion.
Of course. Because, by the way, talking about house of worship, I think you might be familiar with the concept of amalgamation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a theological hot potatoes. I'm not going to pick it up tonight. But my question is, especially to Philip, okay? And Lorelei, if you can help, you are more than welcome. So, was there in the United States of America a general sentiment among Bible-believing people that the African race is either the successors of Ham, so they are condemned to slavery by the curse of their grandpa Noah, or maybe that they, in fact, I read a few tracts from the 19th century where they said that, in fact, the blacks are part of the animals that Adam gave a name to, you know. Adam named the animals in the Garden of Eden, and blacks were like parading before Adam. He said, this is black or African American or so. And the Mormon church, I think until the 70s, even held this opinion that blacks are not really humans, they're animals. So you have here Christians. I don't speak about social Darwinism. I speak about Christians. How epidemic was this concept in the American church? And how much of it is left today?
Well, I think it was more of a byproduct of some of the policies that certain state and federal governments were using against the African American people. There were Jim Crow laws in the South, and they made it pretty much illegal for a white man and a black woman, or a black man and a white woman to get married. So if they made that illegal, and then they add a connotation from, you know, a quote from the Bible that would help that out, it would say, okay, well, this is the law of the land, but it's also the law of God. So it would kind of back that up. If people want to take the curse of Ham as a literal sense of African Americans being cursed from Noah's time until today, I don't see the logic to it, but a lot of people at that time with a very minor education might believe that. And it's unfortunate. I found it very sad that until the mid-60s it was illegal for two consenting adults to get married that were of different races.
Until the mid-60s.
Until the mid-60s, yeah, in certain.
Like in South Africa, for instance.
That was until the late 80s.
Yeah.
But it was illegal in America until the mid-60s. And I just think that people were kind of focusing to parts of Genesis and trying to mold it into a situation where it would be for their benefit, less than taking the teachings of Christ in the Gospels and saying, love your brother as your own and as yourself, and not taking those teachings as much into consideration.
How much for these wounds to heal? How much do you think it will take for these wounds to heal, for this inequality to be fixed and repaired? Or it's never going to happen?
I think that with some people, it's never going to happen. I think that if you've never, you might see African Americans on the street, or you might see a Mexican American on the street, but if you never really get to know these people, some of these people will never have pity on each other. And I think it goes both ways. If you've, don't have any white American friends or any Romanian American friends or German American friends, if you don't get to know somebody and sit down and break bread with them, or you know, have them as friends and invite them to your house, or get invited to their house. This kind of ethnocentrism and racism and all these thoughts are just going to perpetuate itself, and it's unfortunate. I find it very sad that in 2011 some people still have prejudices against
it's
certain
on both
people.
sides.
I think it goes both ways.
Both ways, yeah.
I think it goes both ways.
And before we conclude this discussion about racial issues, because our time is limited, I want to move on to the next topic. Let me ask you, Philip, do you think that the Roman Empire, part of the failure of the Roman Empire, was its failure to assimilate immigrants? Like, for instance, Germanic people, they were looked down upon as barbarians, like we are looking at black people today, and they became the leaders of the empire. But if they had only assimilated such people, would history not have been different?
Well, it's funny how it's like it's reverse racism. Back in the 3rd century A.D., there was Germanic tribes migrating into the empire.
Superior race today, you know.
And they were, you know, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and they were seen as inferior to the olive-skinned Romans of the Italian peninsula, or Spain, France, and Greece, and other areas of the Roman Empire. I found that if you read history, it's very ironic that the roles were completely reversed, that the darker you were, the more civilized you were. I believe that the Roman Empire didn't really fail because of lack of assimilation. I think it was a compounding of a bunch of different factors. That because when the Roman Empire was expanding into Europe from its base in Italy, that they were able to assimilate, and us as Romanian descendants here, we are a product semi of that assimilation due to our language, and we can speak a Latin-based language, even though we're speaking English here tonight, or due to English being more than 20 or 30% Latin-based. It depends on how you look at it. I don't think that the Roman Empire pretty much fell due to a lack of assimilation of Germanic tribes.
No, you don't think so.
That's just my opinion. I think it was, the economy was faltering. There was a Western migration pushed by the Huns and by other tribes that pushed a lot of people into the empire, and it lasted for 1,000 years. And if you count the Byzantine Empire, it lasted for another 1,000 years. So if you add it all together at 2,000 years, that's a pretty long-serving empire. If we go from Romulus and Remus all the way to the fall of Constantinople in 1453, it goes over 2,000 years, and some people don't take that into consideration, but there was a continuous form of government that lasted 2,000 years. So I personally don't think that it's just one factor that crumbled.
So you don't think that racism or discrimination was a factor?
Oh, there's always a factor of that. I think that people inherently, especially when there's a lack of education, a lack of knowledge, that people inherently look at somebody who's different from them in a negative way. It doesn't matter if you're Romanian, you look different at a gypsy, or if you're a German, you might look different at a Polish person or a Jew, or if you're a white Anglo-Saxon American looking different to an African American. I think that just because there's a difference between certain people, that they're going to look different, that they're going to look in a negative way, instead of saying, oh, well, I like that food, or I like that music, and I might actually like that person if I got to know them a little bit better.
I understand. So let's go on and jump into hot water now. Let me ask you about homosexual rights and sexual orientation equality or inequality in the states, in the world, I'm going to ask you the questions, you are going to give me the answer. I'm not going to make any comment. Okay, right. Let's go ahead. Who's jumping?
Okay, so the issue of equality in terms of the LGBT community in the United States. I think the big issue that happened recently was the Proposition 8 in California, and the right for homosexual couples to be given the same rights as married couples and have it called marriage instead of civil unions or domestic partnership. That's a really big issue, and also is our civil unions, because many people argue that, well, they're accorded the same rights as married people are they truly equal rights? And the truth is that they are not, if you look at what these rights are in particular. And I think it's, when it comes to immigration, taxes, hospital visitation, there are a couple other categories that you see that civil unions are not accorded the same rights.
Federal income taxes.
Yeah, federal income taxes and different types of benefits that homosexual couples under civil unions do not have these same rights. So that's the big issue today. And should they be accorded these rights? And also, there's an amendment to maybe...
What do you think? Should they?
Personally, I definitely believe in equality. And if you're an American, and I don't want to separate my religious beliefs from my political beliefs, because I don't have an issue with homosexuality, as I understand it so far. But as an American, I definitely believe that equal rights should be accorded to both groups. If you're American, then yes, you deserve equal rights.
Okay, Philip, what do you think about?
My personal opinion is the same. You know, if I think that people who are so judgmental upon homosexuals in this country don't really know any homosexuals, and they don't understand that, you know, if whatever their personal opinion is, if two men love each other or two women love each other, that if they don't have any religious affiliation, which I think everybody in this world, and even God gives us that right, that if we don't want to love him, we don't have to love him.
Yeah,
okay?
I agree.
You know, I want to love God, so that's, you know, my personal belief. But if somebody personally does not want to, but they want to love each other, what rights are afforded them by the state, I think should not be associated with religion. That's just my conclusion, to keep it separate. And so if people get sick and they're in the hospital and they're not allowed to see the person, even though they live with them in the same household, just because they're not technically related because of a signature on a piece of paper, a marriage license, or not being allowed to have that marriage license, I think really puts it in perspective that, you know, a lot of these people are not given the same rights as other citizens.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Let me give you the argument from the other side. They say families are entitled to certain rights because they are supposed to give birth to children and to raise children.
Yeah.
And so we are given a man and a woman this right because they are able to procreate. But two men and two women up to this day never be able to procreate.
That's correct.
And so why should we give them rights that would be a burden on the taxpayers if they are not able to procreate?
Well, it's not a burden on the taxpayers.
It's not a burden on taxpayers.
No.
Why?
Because you know, me and Lorelai are cousins, but if we weren't cousins, we can go to City Hall tomorrow and sign some paperwork and we'd be legally married. It doesn't mean that we're in love. It doesn't mean that we're going to have children. We might adopt a child. It doesn't mean that, you know, there's no test, there's no all-knowing test that would show whether there's a relationship between us two, that whether we sleep in separate bedrooms or anything like that. So if not everybody gets married to procreate, not everybody gets married to
raise children.
To raise children. Not everybody gets married for financial benefits, to you know, file taxes and to be able to click on that marriage box that they're married and have a deduction. Not everybody does that. But on the other hand, if they are in a serious relationship and people are together for a very long period of time and want to commit themselves, I personally do not find any argument against it.
And we're missing also the fact that many gay couples do have children. Millions of gay couples have children,
Adopted.
either from former relationships because they felt like they had to live a false life and get married and have children and later come out so they have children. And also, I think gay singles are allowed to adopt, not gay couples. So you have people who do have children, and so not giving them the same tax breaks. And also, I forgot to mention that civil unions are not recognized across different state borders.
Yeah.
So if it's recognized in Illinois, you go to, you go to Indiana and it's not recognized. That causes a whole lot of problems, especially if there's an emergency situation. So there's a lot of false assumptions here that there aren't children involved, and people don't understand that you're putting homosexual couples in really compromising positions. They're in legal limbo, and that's really not fair as American citizens.
As a teacher, what do you think about a child being exposed to two parents of the same gender?
Well, I was reading a couple studies about that, and up until this point, I think that the research shows that that does not have any influence on the child's sexual orientation, and also on the child as being like a well-rounded child. I saw a lot of very interesting videos of children of homosexual couples saying, we are loved by our parents, we're nurtured.
People already think, oh, these were biased.
That there was a bias? I mean...
Okay, it depends on if you think if people are born that way, if they have a gene that makes them homosexual, or is that a choosing of their own?
Let me say something. It's my only opinion expressed in this conversation. I believe they do not choose. I don't know if they are born with it, but I know that I never choose to be a heterosexual, and I do not believe either that a homosexual is making a choice, a conscious choice. I believe there are some forces shaping sexual orientation that are beyond individual choice. This is my opinion.
There's several factors.
But there's been studies, for instance, in the Netherlands, in Holland, whatever you want to call it. Gay marriage has been legal for 30 years now.
Yeah.
So there's been a generation of kids born in gay marriage, and their population, their statistic number of gays is still at 1 or 2%.
Yeah, this is
so it's interesting that in countries where it's been legal for 30, 40 years,
it didn't become epidemic.
It's not like it grew in number. So if the population is at 10 million or whatever it is in the Netherlands, and there's only 100,000 gay people, and it stayed at the same kind of number,
which means that the role models have no impact on this kind of choice.
When there are studies that contradict that in these countries, and then you have studies in the United States that kind of, say that, okay, well, if two gay men have a child, or they raise a child, that kid is going to turn into a homosexual, or two lesbian women, that kid's going to turn. I personally don't see how that's going to happen.
Is there an epidemic of homosexuality increasing, spreading in the United States?
I don't think that it's increasing any more than it would have, or exists any more than it would have if it were not stigmatized to the extent that it was before. You have a lot of elderly people that are coming out of the closet now.
This is a fact.
Absolutely fascinating, who said that they didn't even know what this was. There was no community for them to talk to. I was actually watching a video of Seventh-day Adventist gay individuals talking about their lives, and one individual was in his 70s, and he said, I didn't even know this existed. I just knew I had to keep quiet what I felt. He got married, he had children, and then eventually he came out of the closet. So I think the stigma behind it kept a lot of people in the closet. You have the risk of losing your family. You have like the social risk. It was not acceptable in society in
Economic
general.
risk.
Right. So there was really a lot of incentive to keep quiet and live a secret life, or just deny that part of your life and go on. And
I think it just comes down to the fact of whether people think that there's something wrong with them. I, for instance, lived in a very homosexual neighborhood in Boys Town in Chicago, off of Halston and Belmont. I had a roommate, and we had an apartment over there. Lived there for a year and something, and I never felt like there was something abnormal about them. Now, you would occasionally see two men walking down the street holding hands, or maybe an occasional public display of affection or something like that, but it didn't bother me to the point where it just became you know, very.
Is not there more promiscuity among homosexuals than among
I didn't
hetero?
notice that more than what I saw at high school and college parties or in
But
know,
the truth is that there is.
There is.
In terms of gay men,
Yeah.
that there is a higher level of promiscuity. Not gay women. That's a very different thing. And so I don't think that even in this discussion anyone is saying, you know, like that is okay. I think a lot of maybe Phil and my experience is that I have homosexual friends that are in long-term committed monogamous relationships. And when you're exposed to seeing these things, you see them as people that are committed to a healthy relationship, not as people that are living an insane lifestyle. And I think that's what we're talking about is when you see that that is normal and they live like other people and they aren't hurting anybody. Again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it makes you think that a lot of the stereotypes also that you have are wrong. And also it's really interesting what Phil was saying, that it is seen as a disease or mental disease or an illness, and that has led to the development of reparative therapy, which is very much endorsed by
the
a
church.
lot of the, the church.
What is your take on it? I'm really
Okay, so
curious
reparative therapy is just a type of therapy that is not endorsed by any legitimate organization, that they do certain techniques to try to make a straight person gay. Some of them include praying away the gay. If you pray hard enough, God will change you. But there's other techniques, for example, for gay men. They will have like different steps, like, you know, participate in masculine activities. Don't do gay activities, like going to the opera or going to art activities. So
Do
they have
hunting
very,
or
exactly,
football.
they have very, you know, what is masculine, this is feminine, and you force yourself to do this long enough until you change. And that's built upon the assumption that there's something wrong with you and that you have a disease. And we know that there's many factors that go into homosexuality, including like prenatal issues. There's a lot of factors tied into that. But the issue that I have with reparative therapy or conversion therapy is that it doesn't work. And like we have a lot of different statistics talking about people that have come out of it.
You mean you are Christian?
Right.
Okay, so you mean if a gay person prays to Jesus, and even if we at our youth meetings group, we just create a prayer group, prayer chain, continuous fire, whatever, to pray for that person and feast and pray, fast and pray, not feast, okay, fast and pray. You think that is not going to work?
Well, can you pray away your skin color? These are innate qualities. These are not, I think you can pray away your polygamous inclinations, or you can pray away other choices that you have.
According to the Mormons, you can't pray away your skin color.
So the question is,
Michael Jackson is evidence.
Right.
This is my argument against it. Let's say doctors in the next 5 or 10, 20, 30 years find a gene for homosexuality, the way they found a gene for alcoholism.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to compare the two because one's a disease and one I would consider not a disease. But if they do find a gene, or a gene for hair color, or a gene for skin color, or eye color, if they do find a gene for homosexuality, how do you pray away one of your genes?
But your behavior is not programmed, you know, like that of inferior animal,
behavior,
like a reptile. You know?
What you have as behavior and what you have in your genetic code, I think, are two different things.
Yeah, of course. I agree.
Okay? I mean, I might like fast food,
Yeah.
and that's one of my behavioral traits because I like to eat
Maybe
whatever,
it's your
French
gene.
fries or something, but I don't believe that there's a gene for that.
Yeah, there's a gene for alcohol, for instance.
But there's a gene for alcohol, and I think that if somebody puts the alcohol on their lips, that they might trigger something that would, you know.
But alcoholism is something that will destroy your life.
Yeah.
Being a peaceful gay person, that's just another, again, this is just an argument, that's just another variation in the spectrum of the human experience that is not necessarily bad. You can choose to make that a bad thing, as can straight, promiscuous individuals. And that's why I think there's a difference. People always compare alcoholism to homosexuality.
So what are the results, the positive results of the
reparative therapy?
Reparative therapy,
okay, I was reading one study. Of course, the Christian studies support it, but you don't take into consideration the fact that people who go into it that have a Christian background have a large incentive to say, yes, I am better. I am not gay anymore. You have a guilt that is built up inside of you, and you want to believe. But I read a really interesting study that was talking about, probably the most comprehensive study done on this, showed that 88% of individuals who wanted to change said that it failed.
Were they Christians?
I think many of them were.
Yeah.
3% said that they underwent a change, and then the others fell into different categories. But one thing that is tied with reparative therapy is suicide and depression. And a lot of people who go through this, because a lot of it is also tied to this type of religious guilt. So you have a lot of people who come out of this therapy even more confused, with even more guilt, and nothing
So why
is
didn't
changing.
Jesus help me out?
Yeah, they're not changing. I mean, I personally know individuals who say, if I could choose to be anything else, I know people who have lost their family because of it, and they don't want to. They want to not deal with this, but they said they can't. They've tried everything possible, and this is just how they are. Yeah, that's why I don't think it's effective. And also, you see the increase of suicide with really young high school students, and I think this is a result of this type of you can change who you are attitude. You have a disease, and I'm not saying it's okay to be gay or it's not okay. I mean, I am saying that it is okay, but I think that young people who don't feel like they can come out and be honest about who they are will go and do more dangerous, risky activities to cope with the pain of being shunned by society. And
Like drugs or?
Drugs and really risky behavior, and also depression is very high. And also we've seen this year with, like, I don't know what, over 15 suicides that have been very public with young.
Because of bullying in school.
Right. So we have to kind of change the discussion here and stop accusing and saying you're going to hell, which is very much what Christians do. And I'm not saying accept homosexuality. I'm saying try to understand it and try to create a place where you can interact with people, learn about them, and also be a friend. And maybe you can understand more about it. And maybe it is wrong ultimately. I'm not the one to judge. But I think to have a greater understanding of people as individuals, we always remove ourselves and we say, oh, they do this, we don't do this. You kind of, you know, you see where I'm going with that?
What I've noticed, and I think Lorelai can maybe paraphrase this as well, I've noticed that once people know a few homosexuals, whether they're lesbian, gay, transsexual, you know, that they change their opinion. They see that these people are just like you and me. They eat the same food, they drink the same water, but maybe there's some subtle differences between us and that they're still human beings. So that's where, now if they want to have a certain lifestyle that doesn't, you know, I don't judge a person of the Islamic faith or of the Jewish faith or of the Catholic faith or something like that, and because they have certain subtle differences in how they worship or what they believe. I think the same thing should apply to people that are...
I am all in favor of you. It shouldn't be make a crime to be homosexual. But I think the most difficult issue is when the question is whether or not a homosexual, an open homosexual, should be accepted into the church.
Okay.
Because I don't mind...
But until recently, you can go fight for this country. You can go die, spill your blood in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. And if you told them that you were gay, they would kick you out. And to have a disorderly disorderly discharge thing on your employment record was seen very, very bad. It would be like going to jail practically, because that's how bad it looks on a resume. Instead of saying, oh yeah, I served 4 years in the military, and then I got kicked out because they found out that I'm a homosexual. So technically, I'm not saying that it wasn't technically a crime, but it was seen as a crime because you technically got fired for it. Until recently, I think it was in 2001 or something in Texas, where if two men were found having relations or something, they can go to jail. Yeah. And they can get prosecuted for that. It's against the law.
Sodomy is against the law in certain states.
Yes.
Georgia included, I think. No, it was...
I think it's illegal. I think it's legal now everywhere, generally speaking, in the United States. But until recently it wasn't.
Because of the Supreme Court.
But I'm saying, like, until recently it was against the law within our generation and everything, where people would not have afforded the same rights, and that if you are not under the U.S. Constitution, under the Bill of Rights, if you're not afforded the same rights, that means you are a second-class citizen. And I think the way a woman should not be a second-class citizen, the way an African-American shouldn't be a second-class citizen, personally, I don't think that a homosexual should be considered a second-class citizen. So if they should have full benefits of marriage or of other certain rights, that if you consider, and this is just an opinion, if you do consider yourself a Christian and do unto others as you would like to be done unto you, that these are certain unalienable rights given to us by God.
I'm a Christian. If I were homosexual, I would like everybody to pray for me to change. But it doesn't work, it seems.
Well, I think the main point here, and I think I can speak for Philip and myself, is not trying to convince anybody to accept a homosexual lifestyle or to consider it sinful. That's not
But to be tolerant.
Exactly.
To be tolerant.
The point is that no matter what your opinion is, especially as Christians, especially in the church, that's not our place. So I don't even worry about that issue. My place is if a homosexual wants to be part of the church, how can I be a friend to this person? And how can I make them feel welcome and make them feel like their problems are legitimate problems? They don't have to pretend to be somebody else. If they want to take on leadership positions, that is something at this point I don't know how that would be dealt with. But for a homosexual to not feel comfortable in the church, I think that is kind of a tragedy. Like that is counter to everything that the church is there.
But you admitted that male homosexual might have a tendency to promiscuity. Like it's testosterone against testosterone. Let's say.
I don't think
I
don't think it's a homosexual problem. I think that's a male problem.
It's a male
problem.
I think
Exactly.
men in general,
okay, good.
men in general
Pigs.
are a lot more think more about sex than women do.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Of course.
So if we're going to start just picking on homosexuals, 1% of the population or 2% on how you want to take it,
half of them are males. You know.
We don't know.
It's male.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you can. It's not on the census form. So when you fill out the census form in 2010, it's not like there's a box that says, "Oh, I'm a."
I'd like to ask you two questions. One is for Lorelai. The other is addressed to Philip. Lorelai, back in Romania, I heard that teachers in the United States are basically pushed or instructed, trained to influence their students to become homosexuals. So you are a teacher, okay? You are a teacher. And tell me, is it true that in the schools in the United States they teach kids to become homosexuals, to they influence them into
I think that would even be illegal. I don't think you, as a teacher, can influence your student to have a certain sexual orientation, have the agenda to influence your student. I think as a teacher, what you do is that you present the world and the realities that exist in the world. And one of the realities is that there are many gay people, and that gay people are people just like us, should have the same access to the resources that straight people have. And that's my role as a teacher, is that if I have a student that's a homosexual, I don't discriminate in any way against this student. I don't feel like that has been something that I have experienced in my education, that a teacher was trying to influence me. Maybe in the women's studies programs, I never took any of those classes. But I don't feel like that's my experience, or that is what I'm being told to promote.
You think there is a difference between Christian high schools and secular high schools in sexual sexual education, and which one of them you think is healthier?
I think the ugly truth is that a lot of Christian education completely gives one option to students. And I'm not saying that that is a bad option, like abstinence, for example. That is obviously the ideal, and it's a great thing.
You think it's realistic?
We know that it's not realistic. And we know that children in Christian high schools are as sexually active as children who are not. I mean, everybody has had experience knowing people at Christian schools, et cetera, knowing about people getting pregnant in public schools, at church. And to preach or to teach that that is your only option, and to not teach children how to protect children, or high school students or college students, how to protect yourself from different diseases or other things is doing them a disservice, because many people will choose to not follow the ideal and to have certain life experiences, and to not equip them to be safe and to educate them on the bad things that could happen to them, I think puts them in danger. And you have a lot of clueless kids going out into the world, and you see a lot of bad things happen to them. They don't know how to protect themselves. Again, that's not the ideal, and that's not a good thing, but we have to give people, we have to educate students, you know, and be realistic, but yeah.
Philip, you know, we talked about affirmative action for disenfranchised people. But is not a reverse situation among gay people? Like, many of them have very good jobs in entertainment industry, in fashion industry, in arts, in literature, culture, liberal arts, you know. I mean, I was disappointed. I used to be disappointed. When I learned that one of my favorite actors, action actors, as a kid, was a homosexual. But I couldn't learn it until 2000, you know, when the guy was already dead. So a lot of actors, entertainment industries, Hollywood movie makers, they're homosexuals. Is this a kind of mafia, or it's a conspiracy, or is not some reverse affirmative action?
I don't believe so.
You don't believe so?
I don't think that there's a...
It's an accident that many people in the entertainment industry...
I think that that art sometimes is a way of expressing your pain, and I think that a lot of homosexual artists do have had a lot of pain over the years, and that they can express it through art.
Did you read? I'm sure you both read Oscar Wilde, The Portrait of Dorian Gray?
Yes, of course.
It's a typical situation, yeah.
Yes, and Oscar Wilde was a homosexual.
Yeah.
So,
art was a way to keep him...
I think that one of the forms of dealing with discrimination, with certain bad things that happen to you through this pain, is through a form of art, whether it's music or acting or painting or fashion. And I don't think that's I don't think it's somehow a conspiracy that Elton John and some other, like some homosexual actor or something, they work together to promote their cause that much. I think that they do use their fame to help recognize that there is a problem, that certain people do not have certain rights and are not are considered second-class citizens.
This is just a question.
Due to their lifestyle.
A question that I'm wondering about for years, because you said there might be a homosexual gene. Might it be possible that this gene is associated with a certain tendency toward art, aesthetics, you know, some kind of activities? Some kind of activities. So, because if you say if it's in our DNA, would it be possible that this gene might be associated with another gene that makes somebody prone to artistic activities?
I just want to respond to that. I think if you look at the gay community and see what they do professionally, what interests and hobbies they have, you will see that it is a wide spectrum. You have your lumberjacks in Idaho who are gay. You have people that you would never think that
soldiers.
Are accountants, soldiers, you have people in every area.
So it's not
I think that
genetic.
is a very dangerous statement to assume, because that mean most people that I have met have not fit the stereotype. There have been people that I would have never guessed that.
I personally have never met somebody that's a homosexual that's in the fashion trade. I just haven't, but I've met people that are gay that they work as a waiter or something else.
Leading persons in the fashion trade, I don't want to say homosexuals more than often.
There is a lot of
overrepresented.
Yes, that is correct. I don't know what the percentages are. Obviously, Versace was a homosexual, but his sister, who took over the company afterwards, isn't. So,
Is homosexual.
you know, Giorgio Armani isn't, but Tom Ford is. So it depends on what.
Okay, so is homosexual a danger to society?
Is it a danger to society?
I personally don't think it is.
I don't think so.
I think it's.
How about the church?
Well, I think in both gay and straight world, there are certain things that are that promote healthy living in general, and certain things that do not. And so, yes, maybe some things in the homosexual community, as in the straight community, are not. They don't promote health and well-being, mental and physical well-being. And so, maybe in that way, in the church, I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I think it's a reality that we're going to have to face in the next decade when we have no choice but to do something about it and to face it. Now we can kind of skirt around the issue and go around it, but at one point we're going to have to face it, and I don't think that that can hurt us. I think that could make us stronger.
I think that the general worldwide trend in our near and not too far distant future is that certain rights are going to be afforded to homosexuals. And
okay, let me tell you, I am 60. I'll be dead in 10, 15, 20 years from now, okay? The church will be taken over by people like you, if you stay, if you choose to stay. And do you think that I want to focus on the Seventh-day Adventist youth now. Do you think that the Seventh-day Adventist youth is moving toward a progressive worldview, tolerant worldview? Or do you think that in our church the tendency is toward the kind of sectarian approach of such issues?
Well, I was recently reading an article about a debate that took place at Southern Adventist University, and it was a group that was defending the homosexual lifestyle using the Bible, and a group that was against this. And so I think it was just a project. It wasn't really that these people had these views. But what was interesting is that the person writing the article remarked that the people in the audience were booing the side that was for homosexuals living open and being accepted.
These were students.
These were students, and the person writing the article was shocked at just the kind of violent reaction that the students had against the side defending homosexuality. I think that's very indicative of what the reality is. People that are very much involved in church tend to be on the side of being less tolerant. Maybe because they haven't been exposed to it. But I think a lot of it is because they literally interpret certain Bible texts certain ways.
Yeah, I don't think that you are going to go too far with the Bible only, by the way. You know, I mean, if you talk Bible based only on slavery or women, you come to the same conclusion after
exactly,
all, you know?
exactly.
So,
and I think if you just take the Gospels in hand, there isn't, you know, don't quote me on this, but I'm asking you. Is there any reference? Did Jesus ever speak about homosexuality?
If you take Jesus as Jesus, the way we know him from the gospel, he's incredibly tolerant. If you take Paul and Peter and James, it's a different story. One of our issues as religionists, okay, is how to reconcile Jesus with the letters of Paul and I mean the early New Testament theology. And it seems to me, I mean, it's my opinion, Jesus is seminal to a theology that goes beyond Paul and Peter. And in fact, I think that our job in the 21st century is to recover Jesus, you know, the true Jesus from all these theological debates and traditions that accumulated in time. So, but I'm a heretic now when I say all this, because we take the Bible as being inherently the Word of God.
Okay, but you might consider yourself a heretic in this kind of thing. But just like the bumper sticker says, what would Jesus do? Or people with T-shirts.
Jesus would be tolerant.
That's what I'm saying. So if you're thinking about if it's right or wrong, sometimes it's just good to take yourself out of the situation and say, what would our Savior do?
I usually don't buy all the pro or cons on homosexuality picked from the Bible, because they are biased. But there is, I'm getting into hot water right now. There is a very interesting event recorded in the Gospel when a Roman officer came to Jesus to ask him to heal his a young boy of his, a young slave servant. And he was so sad because that lad was sick. And given, I mean, you are the specialist in Roman history. Now you tell me what you think about this. A Roman officer has a young lad as a slave, and he's hurting a lot because the lad is sick. I don't know.
Typically in Roman society, there was a very large disconnect in between the owner and the slave.
Yeah.
Unless there was something going on.
Okay, this is your answer.
But on the other hand, obviously we don't have any documentaries from the Roman Empire that would show us kind of how. I personally think that if people live together in the same household, and you buy a slave at the age of 2 or 3 from a slave market at an auction, and they grow up in your house,
you love them.
You might love them, just like you love any other person.
With no sexual interest.
With no sexual interest. So I don't think that there's much to that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there wasn't situations in ancient times, even in modern times. I mean, take Thomas Jefferson, for instance, with some of his slaves. Yeah. There's been instances where an owner and a slave have had relations in that manner.
Romantic relations.
Romantic relations, yes.
Sexual slavery.
Concubine relations.
Okay, in fact, sexual slavery is legal in the Old Testament. Okay.
It was,
even war rape is legal in the Old Testament. So, I mean, we can't take the Old Testament as a guideline for our lives today. Thank you very much for your comments and for your helping us to better understand an issue which I have to recognize with the older generation are still handicapped in handling this issue. And, you know, I hope that above all, we are going to do what that bumper sticker was suggesting. What would Jesus do in every aspect of life? Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.